I'm Greg Pollock, VP of CyberResearch at UpGuard. Election security is a topic on many of our minds right now, and there are valid reasons to worry about the security and fairness of our electoral systems. But there are also irrational fears that are overblown and other risks that are still underappreciated. Today, I'm going to talk about the particular risk that our research team focuses on, data leaks, and how that relates to election security. It's worth clarifying first what a data leak is. The essence of a data leak is that someone has exposed data of some level of sensitivity to the internet, making it publicly accessible when the nature of the data, like personal information or credentials, means that it should be private. It's useful to juxtapose that model with the model for a data breach, where a malicious actor chooses a target and finds out how to break in to take the data. Data leaks are generally not malicious in intent, but they can still expose the same kinds of data that would be sought by an attacker, like personal information, credentials, business secrets, and virtually any other type of information that can be stored digitally. The same types of information that we talk about with data breaches more generally are the kinds that we worry about when we talk about election security. During elections, we want to preserve the confidentiality of voters' personal information. We want to preserve the integrity of the voting data itself, and we want to preserve the availability of the means for voting. During an election, each of those pillars of information security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, can have technical or non-technical interruptions. For example, the availability of voting can be disrupted by technical means if an attacker exploits a vulnerability in a voting machine. The same result, denying people the ability to vote, can also be obtained by non-technical means. For example, the Supreme Court has upheld a Wisconsin state law that prevents ballots mailed before the election date but received after it from being counted. That will likely result in tens of thousands of mail-in votes not being counted. That would be considered a major event if it were a cyber attack, but here, the same result has been accomplished by legal means. One of the things that is interesting about election security is the way in which technical and non-technical attacks can be mixed. Channel 4 News in the UK recently broke a story about how the voter database used by the 2016 Trump campaign marked 3.5 million Black Americans for deterrence. That is, they should be deterred from voting at all. This strategy involves both the technical element of voter profiling and a spectrum of technical and non-technical campaign tactics for accomplishing that goal. Additionally, when we approach elections through the lens of information security, we can't help but notice the massive risk posed by the supply chain. Now, studies on this vary in the exact number they arrive at, but the consensus is that somewhere between 50 and 75% of data breaches are caused by or related to third-party vendors. Assuming a similar exposure for elections vendors, the risk of some breach or leak is very high. For the current election cycle, the Federal Election Commission reports over 2,000 software vendors receiving money from campaigns, creating a large surface area for third-party exposure. In addition to that huge web of vendors, the many states vary in their laws pertaining to voter data, and this variance sometimes creates confusion and even panic. Some states publish the names and addresses of all registered voters, which is personally identifiable information, but is considered public for this purpose. Because the data is personally identifiable, people who don't know state voting laws often assume such data is protected. As a result, they can be tricked into believing that a major cyber attack has occurred when such data is being circulated. And this has happened twice in recent months. First, when journalist Julia Yaffe tweeted that stolen U.S. voter data was being distributed by Russians in the dark web. And second, when what are believed to be Iranian actors sent threatening emails from a domain related to the Proud Boys, a far-right gang. In both cases, though, the voter data used to intimidate people was public and in fact did not indicate a breach, as the FBI clarified. While we should approach reports of leaks with a healthy dose of skepticism, they do happen. In 2017, UpGuard researchers identified a cloud storage bucket containing database backups with information on about 1.8 million Chicago voters. The database had been produced for the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners by Election Systems and Software, one of the major voting system vendors in the U.S. The data included individuals' names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, driver's license numbers, partial social security numbers, and dozens of other data points. After notifying ES&S, the exposure was quickly secured. In another case, UpGuard analysts discovered a downloadable copy of the Republican National Committee's voter database. This instance of the database had been exposed by Deeproot Analytics, a voter intelligence firm. The database contained detailed information on every registered American voter, from contact information like their name and address, to personal and psychographic characteristics like modeled ethnicity, modeled religion, and political leanings on a variety of issues. That database is part of the RNC's Data Trust Project, a long-running composite based on many sources. Some of that data comes from the campaigns run by individual Republican candidates. Those campaigns get access to a portion of the party's voter database in order to target their would-be constituents, and then, after the campaign, they feed that data back into it with the results of their canvassing. Those on-the-ground campaign activities are also mediated by technology vendors, like a company called Campaign Sidekick, a get-out-the-vote app that left its codebase and credentials publicly accessible via a misconfigured website directory. You can read more about these and many other cases involving elections and personal data, including our discovery of the codebase of a Cambridge Analytica affiliate on the UpGuard breaches blog. Those 3 leaks that we've discovered in the past help illustrate both the many vendors involved in the election process and the different ways in which data can be exposed. Such data leaks are an ongoing problem, and the UpGuard research team has recently investigated and secured another leak related to election security. In this case, the exposed data pertained to a county in Florida, which, like all counties, is responsible for administering voting and information about how to vote within its jurisdiction. In 2000, George W. Bush won the state of Florida by only about 500 votes, and this year Florida will again be a high-stakes battleground state. In late September, UpGuard researchers detected a cloud storage bucket named Martin County. The bucket contained backups of systems representing the intranet and web presence for Martin County, Florida, generated in 2017, as well as a text file with a GitHub authentication token. After examining the contents of the database, it was clear from the user's email addresses that it pertained to Martin County, Florida. Chris Vickery, UpGuard's director of CyberResearch, began attempts to notify Martin County, and eventually public access to the storage bucket was removed. The database contained the usernames and hashed passwords for around 1,200 personnel related to Martin County operations. Notably, 6 of the users had email addresses at martinvotes.com, the official website for the Martin County Supervisor of Elections. Also of note were users with email addresses for Martin County's IT vendors, mainly a company called Promet Source. In addition to the hashed passwords for users, the database also contained a plain text password for the Drupal admin account. One question raised by the user accounts here is the degree of access that Promet Source developers, and possibly other vendors, have to Martin County's website. This question was answered by further research into the significance of the GitHub auth token, which led to the discovery of Promet Source developer documentation in a public code hosting site. And that documentation confirmed that the developers had the ability to access and deploy to Promet Source development environments and to Martin County's production website. Promet Source's documentation also pointed to further sites where a malicious actor might attempt to gain access, with IP addresses and domain names for pre-production environments, and of course the documentation on how a developer would access them. Finally, the documentation included the address of a browsable mailbox designed to comply with Florida's public records laws, but which circumvents the need to request the documents from the county clerk, directions for which are on the Martin County website. Among questionable documents visible in the mailbox were a contract from DocuSign that included the security code needed to access the document. In addition to the user accounts portion of the database, there were also logs of activity on the Martin County site. Like most logs, much of the activity was banal, tracking which URLs people accessed at what times. But the logs also showed activity from outside requests, including requests for documents from an IP address located in Russia. Looking further into the significance and history of that IP address, analysts found it on a list of IPs that had been banned from other sites due to originating malicious activity. While this in itself could hardly be called a large-scale cyber attack, it shows that Martin County's site, for which personal and system credentials were exposed on the internet, was at least somewhat visible to a potential foreign threat actor. It's also worth noting that this database backup is from 2017, and any activity since then is unknown from the data that UpGuard has reviewed. Data leaks do happen, and they can affect the election supply chain. There's also a great deal of information related to elections that is intentionally public, and it's worth verifying that reports of a breach are coming from a trustworthy and knowledgeable source. Fortunately, in the case of Martin County, We can report that the exposure was secured well before the election, but it's still a useful reminder to be vigilant of the risk that such exposures can pose to the many entities responsible for the administration of our elections. Thank you.